How much pad could a Vision Pro pad if a Vision Pro could iPad?
The thing that's funny to me about this is a while ago, I was working in the public lobby of my office building, and I had brought down into this sort of public workspace my two 12.9-inch iPad Pros, and I had them just in front of me working side by side on a thing. So I was writing a script on one of them, and I had some research notes, probably Evernote, open up on the other screen with a little thing to type on. I was kind of going back and forth between the two of them. And I had headphones on, but I just happened not to have any music on them. And I saw the people next to me start pointing, and I overheard that they started talking about this real weirdo who's over there using two iPad Pros.
No way.
We haven't yet reached the Picard point where you can just have iPads spread all around you, and it's just a visual indicator of, oh yes, this is a person who's very busy and working on a lot of things.
Oh, much better.
So I was on my way over here and was carrying my Mac in my hand, and someone stopped me on the street and said, "Oh, what are you working on?" And I think it's just such a funny, it's very serendipitous, because what I wanted to talk about was whether the Apple Vision Pro will be seen as a productivity device. Now, I think that for many years, people have spent their time spreading their work out, workstations, whatever. People like to have tools in a certain place organized, and then they like to have a place to use those tools. Now, what I think is underestimated is just how fundamentally having your apps in your space is going to replicate that. There's this maxim that The Verge always talks about, which is kind of the big, cheap screen maxim, which is that people like big screens and they like cheap screens, and that people will almost always choose a big, cheap screen over anything that's quality. I think it's partially true. I think that it is a draw. It fills a part of the market. But I think it's also a little more nuanced than that. I think it's more like a value type thing. And when you think about it, the Vision Pro is the biggest screen you possibly have. I mean, there's nothing that is bigger than the entire world, right? You can put your apps anywhere. Another thing to think about is that the Vision Pro is basically one of three, I'm going to call them true external displays that you can use for a Mac. So let's say I wanted to use my Mac. I can buy a Pro display, XDR, which is a 6K display, costs a bunch of money. I can buy a studio display, which is, $1,600. It's 5K. And then I could also buy an Apple Vision Pro and get a big version of that, and it's only about 4K. But there's the three devices, and the cheapest one of those is $1,600, which is like already not exactly halfway, but almost halfway to the price of a Vision Pro itself. Totally discounts everything else that a Vision Pro can do. Now, I was thinking about it, and I wanted to quote something from Walt Mossberg. Yesterday we talked about Walt, and this was his last weekly column from The Verge and for Recode. It was his last in a long series that I believe started at the Wall Street Journal, and it's from his essay called, The Disappearing Computer, which has been, around for a little while now. So let me quote two excerpts. The first one: "I expect that one end result of all of this work will be that technology, the computer inside all these things, will fade into the background. In some cases, it may entirely disappear, waiting to be activated by a voice command, a person entering the room, a change in blood chemistry, a shift in temperature, emotion, maybe even just a thought. Your whole home, office, and car will be packed with these waiting computers and sensors, but they won't be in your way or perhaps even distinguishable as tech devices. This is ambient computing, the transformation of the environment all around us with intelligence and capabilities that don't seem to be there at all." He goes on to say that when the internet first arrived, it was a discrete activity you performed with a discrete hunk of metal and plastic called a PC, using a discrete software program called a browser. Even now, though the net is like the electrical grid powering many things, you still use a discrete device, a smartphone, say, to access it. Sure, you can summon the internet smarts through an echo, but there's still a device there, and you still have to know the magic words to say. We are a long way from the invisible, omnipresent computer in Starship Enterprise.
Okay, so I have been watching CGP Grey for over a decade now, and I think I came to his videos through his first past the post voting stuff probably still my favorite YouTuber, one of my favorite YouTubers at least ever. Love his work. And him and Mike Hurley have been talking about this idea of the multi-pad lifestyle for a very long time.
I have been for many years a multiple Mac person. Everyone that I know is a multiple Mac person. They have a desktop machine and a laptop machine, mostly. Or they have a laptop that they plug into a display, which, you know, they have other equipment to make it a dual experience.
Right.
Big and small.
That comparison is, again, when I talk to people about having multiple iPads for multiple purposes, people think I'm a lunatic. But I think that this is the same thing. Like, but tons of working professionals have multiple computers for multiple reasons.
Yep.
Like, is this all that different? Like, I don't think it is.
No.
And entirely unexpected to me. Like, I would not have predicted the way that I ended up using my Pro, but I realized so fast, like, oh, you know what my Pro is? It is my desktop computer at my office. Like, it just so naturally fell into that role. I mean, almost immediately. That it's like, yes, and now the Baby Pro, like, this is the version of my laptop. I still think there's a weird way that people think about iPads, and I'm still trying to sell this version of, like, no, they're like digital pieces of paper.
Now, I used to teach math in New York City, which is funny because CGP used to teach as well. I don't know, I think he taught physics or something like that. And when I taught in New York, I started out using my laptop. It was, I think, a 2015 Retina MacBook Pro. I had used it for editing for many years up to that point, all through college. But it was getting a little kind of like crusty, I guess, at that point, a little slow. I had really beaten that thing up through a lot of use, a lot of love, so to speak. And I eventually, when I got into teaching, I decided that I was going to buy myself one of the new iPad Airs at the time. This is, I think, right after their redesign to kind of the all-screen display. And at that point, I think that I must have been listening to Cortex for a while as well. And I was kind of convinced about the power of the iPad as a productivity device. And lo and behold, I really found that the iPad was kind of the perfect teaching device. And really what I wanted is more. So I've been intrigued by that ever since, and the idea of having a bigger set of displays to choose from when I'm doing my work, very much like the way people spread, out on a desk with pieces of paper. I mean, an office before we had computers, a lot of it was before we had the desktop metaphor on a computer, was spreading out actual papers on your physical desktop. And in a lot of ways, I think that the Vision Pro is a return to that spreading out in physical space, which is just also virtual space, if that makes any sense. Now, I'm telling you, they have talked about this for years, and as soon as the Vision Pro launched, I remember sitting there with my buddy and talking about how really the Vision Pro was the manifestation of the multi-pad lifestyle. We talked about the price of displays for a Mac, but I mean, what about iPad? You can basically run all iPad apps, of course, other than Netflix and the ones that aren't going to be allowed on it, but you could lay out a bunch of iPad apps on your table and be all good to go and essentially have a, not infinite number, but a limited number of iPads for the cost of a Vision Pro. The experience, that's the big question mark, but it's Apple, and I trust Apple with the experience part of things. So I don't know. I see a lot of merit to that multi-pad lifestyle, and in a lot of ways, it might be the cultural piece needed to normalize having that type of amount of displays in front of you. Rather than buying multiple iPads, you just buy a Vision Pro and it goes out. So it makes economic sense, and it makes experiential sense. And they're going to be able to bootstrap apps from the get-go as long as developers are allowed to do that. So that alone, the displays of the computer and the multiple iPad theory, the multi-pad theory, it might be enough to convince a good number of people that it's worth it, depending on word of mouth.